Uh, so today I hope to convince you that ethics should be an integral part of your practice. I'm going to tell you my story of struggling with some ethical issues and how I discovered through my team that values and ethics are what make our practice at Tobias flourish. So, from the first moment I held my son, Archer, in my arms, it was this amazing thing. A fundamental shift happened to me, and it was visceral. I actually felt it happen. The locus of my very being, that resides in between your eyes and just back a bit, it jumped from back here to this little person in my arms. It was one of those things that all my concerns, the universe had revolved around me before that. All my concerns, all my worries, all my aspirations for the future now resided around this little person. I was worried about their health, about their welfare, and about their future. And I realised that their future is what we as designers are creating. Now, it's amazing how much you can learn from kids. Around the same time, or just before my wife got pregnant with Archer, I decided that I wanted to do something in our local community in Manly, in Sydney. And so I went to the local school and found out that I could teach an ethics class. Now, they say you teach ethics, but you are not allowed to actually teach, not in the sense that I was used to. I went to St James Ethics Centre and learned all about what I was supposed to do. And it was strictly forbidden for me to try and guide anything. I was specifically there just to facilitate, to lead or let them have a civil discussion and interject if they didn't. Now, watching these kids, I would every week go into a Year 5 class and present them with a moral dilemma or a scenario that they had to discuss and debate. And without any guidance, without any moral teachings, these kids figured out their own values. They discussed, reflected, and formed their own opinions of right and wrong. And it was amazing watching this because it occurred to me that it's something that I don't do. It was when I come across one of these questions, I have a reflexive way of answering it. These kids were being thoughtful about it, and I thought, as adults, that's something that I particularly miss out on doing. Around the same time, I was speaking with a guy called Simon Tobias. He'd just come over from London. He had he brought his family over, wanted to bring them up in Manly. He's an old Kiwi boy. And over in London, he had quite a successful human-centered design company called Tobias & Tobias. And he wanted to start up a branch here, and I was just filling him in on what the UX scene was. And we talked quite extensively about my passion in behaviour design. Eventually, we decided to partner up. So, everything was going well until a potential new client came along. It was a banking client. And they proposed we design what could be thought of as a grubby financial product. It was retail finance. It was one of those things that gets people to jump over that barrier for an impulse purchase because there's easy credit there, and they end up in a credit trap. I didn't want to do anything like this. This was the furthest thing from the type of work that I wanted to be doing. And Simon and I discussed and debated this until one day on the Manly Ferry, and I remember it clear as day, he said to me, "You're a designer, fix it." And it was at that moment I realised that we'd been talking at cross purposes. The whole time he was trying to tell me that my role and my responsibility as a designer is to design this right. Banks are an essential infrastructure, part of infrastructure in today's society. And the products and services can be good or they can be evil. And as a designer, it's my responsibility to make sure that they're good, that they help people. So I went in, did the research, and devised a product to help customers in their time of need, while still being profitable for the bank and for the merchants that were going to use it. It was, for funerals and for dental emergencies and whatnot. Places where people would normally draw on their super and put themselves in a worse financial position. So this was a transparent product. It helped people pay it back, and it wasn't about the short-termism that is very easy to seep into when you're creating a financial product because you need the next quarter's numbers to be that much better. It was a win-win-win, a win for the bank, a win for the merchant, and a win for the client. Now, if you looked at my history of presentations, I've done quite a few over the last 20 years, you'd find that it was inevitable that I ended up talking about ethics. We do a lot of research in sticky situations with clients like Hello Sunday Morning. We were researching with people with alcohol dependence. And I thought that my training in human factors had prepared me for this type of thing, but I was still unprepared for the kind of challenges that I faced in doing this research. Now, thankfully, research is quite a mature field, and there's critical responsibilities we have as researchers. But those responsibilities are well documented and discussed. They're responsibilities to the participants to make sure their data is anonymised, to make sure that their health and welfare is looked after during the research. And when you're working with at-risk communities, there's also, not just the health and welfare of them, but also of your researchers to consider. There's the responsibility to the public, if you're going to be publishing research, to make sure that it's transparent how it was conducted, who it was conducted with, what the limitations of that research are. There's responsibility to your sponsors, the people who pay for the research, so they know what the boundaries are of your researchers and what the boundaries are of what your findings are. And then there's responsibility to the data, to make sure that it is used appropriately, not just now, but in the future, to protect that data. So, as we grew, our first PhD candidate hire was Mike Palmier, who's in the front row here. He's an anthropologist, and anyone who knows anthropology knows it has a checkered past. But because of that checkered past, it now has ethics at its very foundation. And when Mike joined us, he was very vocal about it, which was great. But then so was Max, our behavioural economist, and Christina and Eunice, our service designers, and then everyone jumped on board. Everyone wanted to talk about this. They just needed a forum to do it. So we set up an ethics Slack channel, and lots of great chats started happening there. As we outgrew our first office, we took the time to reflect. We had some hard conversations on the promise of joining Tobias and Tobias versus where the reality lay. And through that process, we had a couple of days of workshops internally. Through that process, we started defining our values at a high level, just roughly. Things like the fact that we want to be radical. We want our stuff to have purpose, that we're always seeking deeper understanding, and that we always want to have a good impact on people. Now, intentions are vague, unarticulated feelings. And designers are, well, we all like to think of ourselves as empathetic. We all have good intentions, but we're not remembered for our intentions. We're remembered by our actions. As I said, the intentions that we have are quite vague, and the optimism bias always knocks us into thinking, I'm a good person. And therefore, no matter what we do, we can post hoc rationalise that, therefore, what I do is good. If we don't put the line in the sand, there is no line, and we can always look back at what we've done and rationalise it. As Carr said, words can shape reality. And linguistics and cognitive psych tells us that they not only can shape reality, but when it's something abstract, it creates reality. Concepts don't exist until we have the language to talk about them. Values don't exist until they're articulated. You've got to set boundaries ahead of time that you won't cross. Now, there's a fine line between the goals of an organisation and the welfare of its customers. If that line is never articulated, then it doesn't exist. So anthropology is known as the handmaiden of colonialism. As I said, it's got a checkered past. It's responsible for the slavery of lots of people and a lot of atrocities that occurred throughout history. But they learned from that, and it's since led by the guiding principle of do no harm. But I still felt something was missing. That's one side of the equation, the research side. So I started considering the ethics of design. I looked around at all the design associations, including things like the Designers Institute of New Zealand, and they all had a very similar code of ethics that they've published. But it's all about professionalism. Professionalism to your client. Professionalism in the quality of your work. Now, do good work is a fair goal, considering the definition of ethics is the moral principles that govern a person's behaviour or the conducting of an activity. Research is about people. Design is about object. But that sells short the impact that design has on people. If anthropology is thought of as the handmaiden of colonialism, design can be thought of as the handmaiden of industrialism. And it has a hell of a lot to answer for. So I started digging into the foundations of ethics. The Greeks were the first to get into this, and back then they were talking about the proxima, affecting people you know are in physical proximity of. In 1972, Hans Jonas published a paper about the need for a new ethics in technology. He argued that our designs last beyond us. It's not just the designs, but the effects of our designs. They last beyond us. And so we need to take that into account because it can affect future generations. There's another little gap, and then in 2016, Christine Miller wrote a paper called Owning It, Evolving Ethics in Design and Design Research. What she was talking about there was that now we need a new ethics because design is infinitely scalable and immediately available. If I create an app today, it can be available worldwide immediately. But what's the harm in that? Well, the French cultural theorist Paul Virilio famously said, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. There are consequences to everything that we release into the world. As a behaviour designer, I always pull out Lewin's equation, which is behaviour is a function of a person and their environment. If you change the environment, if you add a design to it, you change people's behaviour. So, in the hyper-frenzy of technology, creating interfaces, creating apps, creating new things to release into the world, people often think about ethics when it's too late. They think about the impact of what they've done when it's already impacting people. Tony Fadell, the CEO of Nest and co-creator of the iPod and iPhone, was talking at the Design Museum in London. And he told reporters that he wakes up in a cold sweat now because of what he helped unleash on the world. His children are now addicted to their iPhones, and his wife reminds him of that every day. It's your fault. People don't take into account that behavioural addictions, the evidence is starting to demonstrate, even though it doesn't even exist in the DSM, the psychology DSM, the evidence is starting to demonstrate it's just as potent as a substance addiction. The only difference is it's available to everyone. Now, compare Tony's regret to Steve Jobs' foresight. CEO of Apple famously would not let his kids have iPhones or iPads. 2 years after the launch of the iPad, a reporter said, "Hey, Steve, what do your kids think of the iPad?" To which he answered, "We don't allow the iPad in the home. We think it's too dangerous." This year I went to the Habit Summit with a few of my team. And we saw Nir Eyal. He opened with a keynote entitled Cashing In on the Promise and Peril of Persuasive Technology. Now, he argued that it can seem a bit dangerous to design for behaviours, but we adopt and adapt to new technologies. Well, the evidence doesn't really support that. We do adopt and adapt, but it doesn't come out with better welfare. Habits, especially when they're designed in the way that he ruthlessly discussed it, can lead to obsession, compulsion, or addiction. And I'm not just talking about, his hook model. I'm talking about all the things that ruthlessly strive for efficiency, things like gamification, nudges, tiny habits to hook routines. All of these things are pushing numbers, trying to get more and more engagement, but they don't think of that next step. And there's a fine line between persuading people to do something that's good for them and coercing them to do something in your best interest or the best interest of your client. So, it's easy to pick on certain things. You can look at a poker machine, and a poker machine, we know that it's designed specifically to coerce you into handing over money that you don't even have. It hits every sense as hard as it can. But what about apps? Candy Crush Saga, it kind of looks like a poker machine, and it acts very much like a poker machine and is extremely effective. In fact, it's not under the scrutiny of gambling. It's only an iPhone app. People kind of separate that out. But before it was acquired by Blizzard in 2014, they published their final annual income off Candy Crush Saga, and it was $2.26 billion. So that's easy to see the correlate between that and a poker machine. But what about a freemium role-playing game aimed at tweens like Kim Kardashian Hollywood? Well, that uses the same mechanics. It just is in a different form. And add to that, it's got a layer of social on top of it. In its first quarter, it published $43.4 million, and that was a short quarter. So, and we can't see the rest of the income from that. But that, again, is unregulated, and it's aimed at tweens, it's aimed at kids. Now look at the other end of the spectrum, things that are designed to help, things that are good for your health, things like fitness trackers. Well, the gamification built into them has created a large jump in an area of mental health, which is exercise addictions. People develop streaks, and they don't want to break those streaks. It's an effect called sunk cost. The longer the streak is, the stronger the compulsion is. And people will keep exercising, even when they're injured. This guy runs along Manly Beach. He's been doing it for ages. For the past 3 months, he's been grunting and swearing while dragging his leg. Now, I don't pretend to know his story, but I'm kind of suspecting that because he wears a Fitbit. So what we need for things like this is a stop routine. And I'm not talking about the hand-waving stuff that you get in gambling apps, things like the I have a gambling problem button that you can press. That's just for good PR and to help people sleep better at night. It's all about responsible gambling. But can you expect A, an addict to admit they're an addict, and B, while they're in the intense strain of gambling, that they're going to say, "Oh, I better stop this now"? It's not going to happen. It won't change the bottom line. So it's okay to do that hand waving. No, what I'm talking about is things that actually have a conclusion to them. Anyone my age, which is old, will remember games like Donkey Kong. They were little 2-screen games. And we played them whenever we could. We gained skills, we shared secrets. We learned to clock it. Now, clocking it means you get to the end and start again at the beginning. And when we did that, we got bored. We went back to our normal life. It had a natural stop routine, a conclusion to it. But games these days don't have that. They're endless platforms. Now, the most effective treatment for exercise addiction is well published. What you've got to do is just reset to zero. Stop the streak. That's all you have to do. But do designers of Fitbit, of Shine or Apple think of these things? Do they think of the future impacts of what they're designing? I very much doubt it, because my watch keeps on urging me to do more and more no matter what I do. We definitely need a new ethics for what we do as designers. So we had the need to formalise tools and protocols, just because whenever we bring on a new team member, a new contractor, a new vendor, a new client, I want us to be able to establish ethics and values and approach up front. In 2015, IDEO created this little book on design research ethics, and it was designed not just for their team, but for their clients. They gave it to them. It established the IDEO way, a common language, and set expectations with clients. If you leave something unstated, people will make assumptions. If you don't draw that line, it moves. So we kept on delving into this stuff. Now, it's great to know and live your values as a team, but it's best to get an outside perspective if you want to communicate them. So we had the opportunity to rebrand from Tobias & Tobias to just Tobias. And so we brought in a brand design firm called Designer Rice, and they applied a human-centered design process on us. Eventually, they captured our purpose beautifully. It was to drive positive and lasting change for communities, companies, and future generations by placing people at the heart of our design process. And they also articulated our values in ways that are easier for newcomers to grasp. And it gave us a better foundation on which we can start building our own ethics framework. That we have open hearts and open minds. We strive for endless curiosity. We fight for what's right and give voice to the people that have no voice. And we play on the edge, always pushing at things. So we faced and overcame more and more ethical challenges, and we talked about them at meetups and conferences like this. And people responded to that, and we're reaping the benefits. Values and ethics have made us flourish as a practice, and I want all of you to be able to flourish as well. I want us all to be proud of the work that we do and the impact that it has. But we need to start having this conversation more broadly. We need to start making ethics a core competency of human-centered design. So how do you get started? Well, as I said, I've mentioned a few things. There's guides for research ethics. We use things like NHMRCs in health. Mike's just gotten an approval to do some Indigenous research through another ethics community. There's things like the IDEO's little book for design research ethics that we can actually build on and personalise to ourselves. But when it comes to day-to-day decision-making, it can get really sticky because there's really complex things out there, theoretical frameworks with 10 or 12 steps that can take months to work through a decision. But then there's something as simple as the smell test. If you feel a bit uneasy about a decision, you just have to imagine the immediate impact of your decision and how it will be viewed by yourself and others. A lot around ethics is just thinking about what will happen after. Things like, how would I explain this decision to my kids? How would I feel if someone reported this on the news? Can I live with this decision? Will it keep me up at night? How would my mother feel about this decision? They're simple questions and simple what-ifs, but they're very useful. Then there's that gap I mentioned in the ethics of human-centered design, something that I want us all to address. At Vivid in Sydney this year, I was asked to speak on a panel, Can Technology Make Us More Human? When we discussed it, it came down to, do we want technology to amplify what it means to be human? We're social by evolutionary decree. We look after our in-group and we vilify the out-group. No matter how you define that grouping, we do that, whether it's politics, race, religion, whatever it is. So is it any wonder that Microsoft's artificial intelligence chatbot, when released onto the world, became a racist dickhead in less than a day? It simply amplified our humanness. No, what we should be doing is aspiring to technology that increases our humanism, not our humanness. It's a subtle but important distinction. Humans suck by nature. We can be really vile and cruel, but our ability to show compassion doesn't. Now, more of us are working on machine learning and AI. We create seed and boundary conditions, and we test them. Machine learning eventually takes this out of our hands. So we have to bake values into seed and boundary conditions in the simplest instruction sets, or the more complex and self-replicating AI that results could be catastrophic. If researchers' guiding principle is do no harm and designs is do good work, I agree with Christine Miller that human-centered design, the blend of research and design, should simply be to do good. Now, I gave a version of this talk at UX Australia in August, and Mike Monteiro was the closing keynote, which was great. It was a big thing. He had I think his talk was how to fight fascism. And he basically said, you as designers, you are responsible to do this. And he gave out this little book on design ethics before his talk. It's a manifesto, a set of principles, a call to arms to take responsibility for what you release into the world. It's another good step towards this framework that I want us all to put together. But we also need practical tools to go with our lofty vision, ways we can apply ethics every day at work. Now, I talked briefly about the smell test, but there's other envisioning techniques that we should look at. And this is my first attempt at creating some tools, and I would welcome any input for this, because I'm just one dumb guy. Envisioning is something that we currently practice with a lot of our clients in the form of exercises like a pre-mortem. Let's get out the elephant in the room. People, when you start a project, people often have these ideas of what's going to kill the project, but they don't talk about it. So we get that out early through this exercise. But there are other exercises that we can look at. What if people became addicted to your design? What if everyone used your design? How will a future generation use your design? And how can your design be harnessed for wrongdoing? What are the hacks around it? What are the pushes at it? And what if AI took your goal to the extreme? Again, really simple things to do. They don't take much time, but they give us these considerations. So, we're at the beginning of forming our own ethical framework at Tobias, but I don't think that's good enough. I think that as a design community, we should all be doing this together. Mike Palmier is going to be closing the day tomorrow with a great preso on real value. He and I created a Slack community called How Might We Do Good? It now has over 150 members on it and some great conversations. And we're actually organising a meetup that's going to be in person and over Skype so we can actually start putting some of these ideas into action. So I would really encourage you to join us in this and come and corner Mike and I during the conference. We're here for the whole conference, just so we can discuss this and start getting something happening. Please send me an email there and I'll invite you to the Slack community. Now, this is an ongoing journey of reflection and refinement that we can all be a part of. I'm certainly going to work on it for the sake of my children and your children, because together we can design a better world. Thanks.